Hi, everyone. Today, me and Tete are going to be talking about her characters, Gerda and Kai, whom she has decided to stop working with. In actuality, she has already gotten rid of them for a couple of months, but we're going to be looking back at the reason why she got rid of them and why, in retrospect, they were not good characters.
Yes, exactly. I think many authors may face this same problem, and it may be an impediment to them. It may be a barrier preventing them from actually pursuing works or solid characters that could work much better. And sometimes you have to know when you let go, and you got to know when it just isn't going to work. You cannot fix something that is dead, unfortunately.
Right. So, can you explain why you think Gerda and Kai felt like they were dead characters?
I think it's because there was no there was no real life to them. They were simply a collection of ideals that were they were simply like animating, if you will, a mannequin or a puppet or a marionette, and they didn't feel real, and their narrative wasn't compelling. I didn't have the truth or the searing reality of experience that I've had with Andre, that I've had with a character coming up very soon, Tatuzia, or ironically, even with fan depictions of well-known characters, which is something we may be discussing in the future. Um, but all these characters felt alive, and their narratives were rich, and it was like an in life experience. But Gerda and Kai felt like a very frustrating fable. It felt like it wanted to reach epic fantasy, but it never got to that point because it was just a sort of an escapist daydream that went nowhere, and over time grew very dissatisfying to the point that it was oppressive, really, and it held me back, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Can you go into more detail about how you got the idea for these characters and what drew you to them originally and how you decided to move away from them?
Yes, exactly. I will delve into that. I will first start off with Kai because Kai formed in my mind first. Um, Kai had, as I said, presented himself as a very bitter man, but I began at that point to be very fixated on folklore and mythology, and mostly folklore and fairy tales and fables. And I was quite smitten with the idea of dark symbolism in winter. So, unfortunately, Kai, whomever he was, and I'm sorry if I completely eradicated him from his narrative, began forming into. I always wondered what would happen if Anderson's Snow Queen was a man, and what would be the repercussions of that. So, unfortunately, I latched Kai's bitterness and existential crisis via Kierkegaard into the form of this character, the Frost Lord, and I began to think about what would happen if you would to retell the whole story. And originally it was going to start off as the Frost Lord controls winter and things like that, but also death. And he was going to stumble upon this young girl whom he takes under his wing, and she's like this crazy Pippi Longstocking type, and he kind of becomes like a foster dad to her, and they go and have fun adventures. But then I thought, well, what if the girl had a mother? And what if the mother fell in love with the Frost Lord? I thought, oh, romance, wonderful. Then I thought more and more about the mother. And I thought, well, you know what? We've never had any narratives about mothers really that much. And at that time, I was kind of hoping I could turn Gerda kind of into the, kind of like, oh, the main character from The Secrets of Nim. I think her name was Mrs. I'm actually
Frisbee.
yes, Mrs. Frisbee. Yes, and I was hoping to turn her into that, because I mean that is a very compelling character. Mrs. Frisbee's very compelling, a wonderful character. Um, and so I thought, oh, Gerda's going to be my Mrs. Frisbee, and then Gerda began having more and more problems. While she did have an interesting plot line, she had anger and rage. These were all external factors with external reactions, and nothing was really made about her personal life. And everything when she met the Frost Lord fell into wish fulfillment and everything was perfect. Like, the Frost Lord became this, fantastic prince who granted all her wishes and she had her fairy tale, ending. And I was trying to convince myself, oh, it'll work because there's a lot of trial and troubles and they face a lot of crazy things. Um, but instead, it just became so rigid and it just became more of an escapist aesthetic thing that Gerda and Kai just fell apart, and I realized they were both dead characters. For a moment, for a very, very long time, though, I felt Gerda could have been rehabilitated into something else. And I tried very desperately to put her into a new genre, a new setting, and even with a new male love interest, ironically, who was kind of the opposite of Kai, I guess. He was not an ideal prince, but a dark, nasty, arrogant bastard, if you will.
And that also didn't work out. We didn't have any, podcasts about that, but we did talk about it briefly in personal things. But yeah, that didn't work out, and, I think it's just better, as you said, to just do away with Gerda because you're forcing her into too many different scenarios, and they all failed. You had the fantasy, and then you had her in the 19th century, and then the final incarnation before she disappeared.
Yes, before she disappeared. I think the 19th century was the worst one. She was so dead and boring. Like all she did was cry, and I guess Kai taught her how to read and write, I guess. Ironically, Kai turned out more appealing in the 19th century, I guess, than he did as the Frost Lord, or maybe he didn't. I can't remember.
Hmm. I don't know either. I personally thought he was a little bit better in the 19th century because at least he could interact with other characters in role plays. But as the Frost Lord, he was pretty much attached to his setting and his powers.
Exactly, exactly. That is, if you will, it's like, that is the problem with characters set in a rigid setting. They are victim to the author's vision. If characters are not allowed to be themselves and are shaped exclusively by the author, they will become, in hands of authors not willing to take risk, become vague ideals. And that's what happens. And you know what? I want to say this. I think for the longest time, and many people may not want to admit it, and don't get me wrong, there's plenty of other compelling narratives out there in books and historical fiction, but I think a lot of 19th century romance falls under the same escapism, fallacies, and problems that fantasy does itself.
I agree.
If you will, kind of like the Bridgerton stuff or the Jane Austen stuff.
Because people are not really into that mostly for, historical insight. They're mostly into it because they like the clothes and the
E-
romance.
Exactly. They like the clothes, the romance, the old, if quote unquote, old style of courtship and writing letters and a guy bringing you flowers. And people like the whole courtship ritual and dancing and all that. Which, if you think about it, it's kind of limited to Western conventionality,
And it's
but
sanitized.
it's very
I
sanitized.
mean, the fact was that these women, it was their job to look for a husband, right? Like they had no other choice. So when you think about it that way, is it really that great?
Yes, it's not that great. It is not that great at all. It is not, because you think about it, every ball you go to, it's like going for an interview for a job.
Yes.
Those
And
things
it's
are
so it's so
nerve-wracking.
materialistic too. It's not about actually fostering a connection. It's just like, "Oh, I need a husband now and he needs to meet all of these expectations." It's like those stories you see on the Tapas front cover page. I saw this really funny comic where um the main character, the male character, is listed as being 6 foot 5 inches tall, and he's like, I don't know, they listed out a bunch of trades, Oh, he's like, CEO, 6 foot tall, six pack abs. Like, it's not even a person at this point, just a collection of idealized traits.
Exactly. And that is the pitfall that befalls many a fantasy character, and many, I think, a character with the 19th century quote unquote aesthetic, because the male, if you will, okay, the male lead itself becomes more of a collection of ideals and whatnot.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe like say with say Austin's characterization, we get a little bit more flaws and psychological insight. But the problem is, it's turned into a following. It's turned into a group of people who follow this aesthetic. It becomes its
That's
own
the
faction.
problem.
And then everybody's churning out these novels that lack Austin's depth of psychology. And all it does is just make a man this idealized hero, and the heroine spunky, and
I
I will never be
know.
loved despite my parents telling me I must marry this rich man. And then, said rich man, or she finds another rich man, turns out just to be the most perfect man in the world.
So it's just tapas.
It's tapas. It's tapas with more text and published on print.
Exactly, exactly. It's the same thing. This whole idealized man who has no personality traits, but he's just so damn vague. And I had the feeling that Kai was like that for the longest time. So I'm kind of glad that you saw it
He's
finally.
gone. He's gone. But I mean, that's unfortunately what Kai became. Even in the fantasy where I was trying to emphasize, oh, he's ugly, he's
I
cadaverous, he's
know.
scary looking. Look, he's got long silver hair and he looks like a walking skeleton. He's scary and people are scared of him. And he does winter and death and he's spooky. He's not an Austen hero or fairy tale prince. He's monstrous, monstrous. I
You said that
yelled.
so many times that I was like, do you even understand what you're doing?
And and then of course, the whole, I keep laughing at the silver hair thing because I actually was going to make a self-parroting tale where Gerda was trying to find Kai, so she was summoning every silver-haired person in existence, and she ended up getting all these franchise characters like Shishamaru and Sephiroth and Geralt, um, and then all these men wanted to trade swords. Like Sephiroth wanted Sesshomaru's sword, and Sesshomaru wanted something from Geralt. I don't think it was a sword, but I guess he wanted something from Geralt, some magic thing.
Right. So I think at that point, it just felt like Kai was a referential character, like referring to all of these other fantasy series that came before him.
Exactly, exactly. This isn't to trash any of these fantasies. These work well, not because of their whole fantasy cool thing, although that's kind of a factor to their enduring appeal for a lot of audiences. But really, what happens is these characters are compelling on their own. Sephiroth is, this deadly, dangerous, single focused madman. And then you have Sesshomaru, who has to go through a kind of a growth arc of becoming less arrogant and, kind of forming into the, he goes from being a very cruel, demon prince type, to being an actual, a caring lord, if you will, especially with his, his forming bond with Rin, and it's a
Hmm.
beautiful development. And, Geralt, I can't say anything about the video games or the books, but Netflix series is friggin' awesome. I love it. I love Geralt's character. Props to the writers, props to Cavill for doing such a phenomenal job with the character. And also, one last shout out to Elric of Melbourne, might be a little more vague, but he's actually a very compelling character because he's deeply flawed, he's ruthless, but he's trying to find truth no matter what it will cost him. So all these
Hmm.
characters are compelling. Kai had none of that. He was just a wish fulfillment for this nice little lady and her two kids.
I felt it was too convenient. Like even from the beginning, he just had to arrive at the right time. And don't forget, another problem you had back then that I did point out to you on certain occasions was that you had a lot of repetition. As I recalled, I think Gerda's sons had to die almost 2 times.
Yeah, they did. That was a problem in the plot. First, they almost died when they first met him, and then they almost died in the end, but he sacrificed his life to save them. But then I'm not sure. Gerda had done something, some ritual to bring him back to life, and he came back to life.
And I think you rewrote the series like in this outline, and then basically Gerda had to like okay, so she saved her sons from the villagers who hated magic people at the beginning, and then they were traveling like throughout the snow, remember? And then they died again almost.
Yes, yes. Okay, so her sons got killed by the villagers. So then Gerda made a deal with Lady Death, or whatever's the Finnish Slavic equivalent, a Morena, I guess, something like that. Made a deal with her, and then Morena or whoever it was going to claim her life in exchange for her boys. And then Kai finds them; they nearly died in the snow. Gets them home, revives them, and then Gerda's like, "Well, I'm gonna die so my boys can live." And then Kai has to do this crazy ritual where he makes a deal with Morena and saves her life, and then she can live happily with her boys. Um, and it was so repetitive. And then
Yeah,
the
I was
weird thing at
asking
the
you why you
end,
had to do it twice. I mean, the
twice.
boys already died once and then they die again. Just what? So Gerda can feel like a heroine because she wants to die for her sons? Like she's a martyr or something.
Exactly. It was all done for plot device, and it was so bad. And not to mention, they die again, and then Gerda's like, "Oh no, what will I do?" And now Kai gets to be the hero because he's going to sacrifice his life in order for her boys to live,
I
because
know.
he's
So
going
many
to love them like his own
problems.
sons.
Like I
And
said, like when I was reading the plot, I got really confused because I'm like, okay, why do they have to die so many times? What's the purpose of having so many convoluted plot points? And not only does she have to, talk to the Frost Lord for them to be revived, they also have to go through Lady Morena before they can go through the Frost Lord. So it was just so convoluted.
it was woefully convoluted. Not to mention, there was a crazy betrayal, intrigue plot woven throughout the whole narrative. We had the character Braun, who was just machinating this whole betrayal up to an ultimatum point. And then we were trying to cram in random characters like Tam Sibby and her beef with Lord Frost, and it just became a mess. It was a mess of repetition. Not to mention, Gerda was like, what, saving Kai like 3 or 4 times from being grievously dead or wounded or something.
Oh, I did not get to that point, but I'm not surprised. Like, why do they okay, when a death gets repeated too many times, it just loses its impact.
It does. It does. I mean, that's kind of like a ploy you'll see in fantasy. And I mean, not to throw shade, but might as well throw shade where it's done. I've seen this done in comic mythology a lot, and honestly, it's never handled well.
Yeah, it just feels like it's done because, "Oh, it's so touching that someone dies for another person," or, oh no, someone died and it's sad," or something. But, like, it doesn't say anything about the characters themselves, which was something I always wondered about Gerda and Kai. Like, they have all these events shape them and, their powers and everything, but who are they actually?
Exactly. If we strip away the powers and all the magic and the trappings and the cool factors, what remains of these characters? And we're left with a void, an empty space, not even a vessel. There's not even a shell or a hull to look at.
Yeah, and I think we discovered this when we were doing the role plays, right?
We did. I mean, okay, let's compare. Andre, he's a wild cannon. He's loud, opinionated, but he wears his heart on his sleeve and you understand him right away. He's an appealing character. People love him, even at first if they don't like him, if he's loud and obnoxious. But then look at Kai. He's cold, boring, calculated, way too polite, like a corpse that's just merely mouthing words. And then you have Kai, Gerda, who's just so sweet and sugary and just this, lovable little chubby mommy figure. And it's just so unbearably sweet. Like, at least, okay, Mrs. Frisbee had a lot of grit and a lot of, flaws, and she was selfish at times, but you were still compelled by her because, it was her driving force of personality that defined her, not only in her journey and the things she did, but also how she raised her kids. Gerda didn't
Mhm.
have any of this. She was just so sweet and ideal.
You didn't even show us how she raised her kids, other than you saying that she was nice. That's too
That's true, and
vague.
I guess her, like, showing them some sort of, like, tender thing, like, I don't know, nursing a baby or growing a plant or something.
That's just emotional shorthand. You never
Exactly.
showed us how she would react if her sons had a special hobby. Would she take an interest, or would she be one of those people who are like, "Oh, you do your own thing," and not really care?
I think she would just act so sweet and pretend to be like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, that's so wonderful. I support you,
What
but
if her
not
sons
really.
get older and get frustrated at her for not actually caring, just putting on a fake face?
I think that would make some conflict, and I think her sons would realize that their mom is just this fake this fake. It's she's basically like a chocolate candy shell, nothing in it. It's just
Yeah,
hollow.
I mean, just because she's nice doesn't mean she's a good mom. That's what I wanted to explore too. Because if she's not actually invested in her kids and just does, the bare minimum or what's expected of her, is she really a good mom? I mean, yeah, she keeps them fed and she says nice things to them, but is that really nurturing someone?
Exactly, because is she helping them mature into strong individuals to take on the world? And I guess that's why I was like, oh, they need Kai so they can learn how to be, the men, warriors, something, the mature adults, and like, Gerda does all the nurturing, quote unquote, the softer things, while Kai is teaching them weapons and magic and the courage of men or something.
But that's not how parenting works.
I know. I did not really think about how parenting works.
Is it because it's fantasy, so you just wanted to simplify it to something like that?
I wanted to simplify it. I also, well, at this point, they were formed during a very transitioning point in my life, and I've resolved a lot of issues with my own family, but I honestly did not know the hallmarks of good parenting because I unfortunately did not have
Mhm.
really good parenting. So I just thought, oh, cool ideals. I didn't get this or whatever. And I'm like, all right, epic fantasy stuff, cool medieval stuff, better than modern stuff. And it was just kind of it was a thing of grasping onto ideals because I myself had no idea what good parenting was, and I'm still learning what that is.
That's true. It's a learning process, but yeah, unfortunately, we never really got to explore that in Gerda and Kai's story. Even though she was defined, by her role as a mother, we never really got to see her as a parent figure, other than the narrative telling us that she is a mother. But that just felt
Exactly.
like, kind of like pandering in a way, because you're like, oh, you don't see any, middle-aged women who are not model skinny in fantasy stories, so we're going to finally get one. Like, it was just simplified to that. You never explored the nuances of what it means to be a middle-aged mother.
I didn't, and the foundation was never there. I didn't form her personality from whenever. She was just always so nice and sweet and caring, and this terrible martyr, like all she wanted to do was, you know, help, birth children and heal the sick and wounded, and with her magic, and all these mean villagers turned on her.
Yes, which leads to the other points I wanted to discuss, the victimhood.
Exactly. The victimhood, not only was it inaccurate, um give me a second here. But I mean, the whole victimhood, the problem is, I think a lot of Western focused narratives tend to put victims as martyrs or ideals without presenting them as complete human beings with flaws or shortcomings, or maybe bringing something, because sometimes the situation is elicited by a reaction to an action. So I was trying to grasp at straws, and I thought, well, the reason the villagers blamed Gerda was because there was this plague and she couldn't cure them, so they blamed her for it and said that she made the plague and all that. And but to be honest, if she's so nice and sweet, are they going to really think she's going to inflict a
I
plague on
know.
them?
I mean, no, to use pagan terms, a crone who was really antisocial and just lived in this hut that was really far away from everyone else. Sure, that could happen, but Gerda, who's always helping these babies being born, and she's just so nice and sweet. I don't think so.
No, I mean, in fact, if anything, I mean, they're going to think, oh, this plague is so bad that our beloved midwife can't save us, and maybe, and ironically, maybe she and her son should have gotten sick too, and they're like, oh no,
Yeah,
you know, um, and I feel like there could have been a lot more love in this village. I mean, honestly, if she's doing all these nice and wonderful
I
things,
know.
somebody, a few of the people are gonna be like, "Oh, she's wonderful. We love her." What would we do without our beloved midwife?
And also, I felt it was forced. Like, you wanted this kind of storyline that you usually see, as you said, in a lot of fiction. For example, Harry Potter, another really popular fantasy series where the main character is someone who is an underdog because parents died, and that coincidentally turned him into the chosen one because of his mother's blessing.
Exactly. This is what happens with chosen ones. This is what happens with a lot of these narratives. When a character, when their narrative becomes one of victimhood and martyrdom, it becomes a thing of where they are an idealized hero or they become the chosen one. Um, I do like how this was challenged with Netflix's version of Geralt because, yes, he does face a lot of rejection and a lot of nasty things from people because of being a witcher and everything. But he kind of helps foster that reputation because he is kind of a jackass himself. So he actually kind of embraces it because I guess he sort of wants to be antisocial and not connect with people. So he's like, "Oh, it works for me."
That
I
makes
like how that
sense.
that that was embraced. Although then he starts to get attached to people, and he's like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe being nice and being attached to people is better than me being an antisocial jackass."
That's true. Right. And a lot of these characters who are defined by their victimhood, unfortunately, don't really seem to move past that. They're the woman being oppressed by patriarchy, for example, or someone who is magical, but they get discriminated against really badly in a society that hates magic. And I cannot claim to have read every book or even most books or even many books with this theme, but from what I've seen, it's not really clearly articulated why non-magic people hate magic people. It just feels like a trope at this point. Like, someone started it and now you see all these books with the same theme. For example, Harry Potter is one of the most popular ones. But especially in a modern context, which Harry Potter, takes place in the modern world, why would people still hate magic? Why would wizards logically still have to be in hiding? I mean, don't they technically have more power over normal people?
That's the thing. So basically, I think a lot of people use the magic as an allegory of pagan beliefs versus Christianity, or unconventionalism versus conventionalism, or uh, a more free approach to things than as opposed to Puritanism. But this, of course, is very Western centric. But the whole thing with magic and versus non magic, one could understand why people would fear such power. It could be used for bad, but however, this is like science. Science can be universally or equally accessible to all people who wish to learn and apply it. And we can do wonderful things. Yes, we've made A bombs, and we can do drones and dreadful things. We have nukes, that could go off, and
Uh-huh.
Chernobyl on our doorstep. But at the same time, we've made wonderful things. We've cured so many diseases. We've eradicated many diseases. We can heal the suffering of a lot of sick and afflicted people. We now have communication where we're doing wonderful things like this right now that we would never be able to do had it not been for science and technology. Therefore, would not the same application of logic apply to magic? Like, especially like, say, Harry Potter, modern times, wouldn't people think magic is cool, and wouldn't they want to have, like, everyone learn magic? I mean, I know Harry Potter's like only certain people can do magic. But I mean, but would not these people be kind of lauded in society? Like, oh, this cool wizard stopped a storm from hitting the town. Cool. And then he gets, I don't know, awarded by the queen, some knighthood. um I think I like how Pratchett kind of commodified magic in his world settings, because it wasn't like, oh, magic evil. It was more like magic became kind of a business thing, and like it became like a economic thing, and wizards were paying special taxes even though they didn't want to pay taxes, and it was kind of interesting. So props to Pratchett for commodifying magic and making people embrace it. So he kind of defied this whole, oh, magic is evil, bad, bad. We
Yeah.
hate magic people, even though they're trying to heal the sick and afflicted.
Exactly. That's what I never understood. But that's a great description. I think I understand why people go for this trope now, like the whole idea of paganism versus Christianity. You're right. I did not get that, but I understand it a little bit better now because the first time I came across this when I was reading books was Harry Potter, which did not appear very pagan to me. But now that you think more about it and the other works that have this theme, it makes more sense for it to be tied to paganism.
It would, and a lot of people will tie things into paganism as well as, like I said, unconventionalism, a more free approach to life, modern humanism, secularism. That will be kind of like the flagship for it all, versus Puritanism, authoritarianism, very damaging, toxic systems of systematic Christianity that are established as a political
Mhm.
system. So I understand why people do this. The only problem is the logistics of it don't work. Now, say if Harry Potter was set in the 1300s, I could understand this. But
Mhm.
1990s England, I think people would be doing things like Pratchett. I mean, Harry Potter's going to become an accountant, but he uses magic, or he's going to be like, I don't know, he works for the National Weather Service to prevent seawalls from collapsing or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I have so many other questions about Harry Potter, but I mean, I can't cover them all here, obviously, but I'll cover a few of them because it is sort of related to how Gerda and Kai's story also had the magic versus non-magic
Magic.
people. So one question I had about Harry Potter was, what happens to the kids if they don't get a career? Like, I mean, why do people always assume after you graduate, you're going to get a job? I mean, what if you graduate from Hogwarts and you can't find a job? Like,
Unemployed,
can you
wizard
go back to
unemployed.
being a muggle? Like, I mean, are you kind of homeschooled if you're in Hogwarts because you're not registered in any quote unquote normal schools, right? So can the can the government arrest your parents for not educating you?
You know what? I think Rowling never explained this. Like, she never explained anything else. Just makes up things and gets them out of her head, if you will. I wanted to say something else, but I've remembered that this podcast is PG. Um, uh, so basically, she never set this up. Honestly, I would think that given the strict educational laws in England, especially at that time, or even now, which, props to England for, not engaging in this horse shit. You've done well, England. Thank you. It's one of
Exactly.
the few things you got right. So UK got education go. Um, she doesn't realize the repercussions of what happens if you fail at your wizarding and you're not prepared for the real world. Instead, you're kind of stuck in this kind of magical fantasy fairy world of wizards and witches and, the magical world of wizarding. You're not, I mean, like, what happens if you have to go into the unemployment line and then you have to become a computer tech? I don't know. And you
I
can't even get a job
know.
because they're like, where
You
did you
have to
go
go
to
to boot
school?
camp. You have to go to boot camp to learn Python and like start coding. But then when you submit your resume, they're like, wait, you didn't even finish your O levels, your A levels, or anything. You didn't even finish high school. What? You just stopped education when you were 11. Are you even literate?
And
How
then
can we take you for
exactly, they're
boot
gonna look at your
camp? How can
resume.
you learn how
They
can you learn
demand your
computer
certificate.
programming?
But I mean, look, I will say this as someone who unfortunately did not get to pursue higher education due to various factors, um, including that the American education system sucks seriously. I won't go into that. It is so hard to find proper jobs if you do not have the education and qualifications. They'll take one look at your resume and like, whatever. So I don't understand. Okay, let's say a random Hogwarts student They failed a lot of their exams, or maybe they passed them. Maybe they did relatively well. Let's say that. But they can't find any jobs as wizarding. All the good wizarding positions have been taken. They have this magic, but it's not paying the bills. And there's only so much they can do living in this la la land of fairies and goblins. Well, when they get back to reality, they're going to have to go on the unemployment line. They have no skills really to show. They haven't learned anything like, say, coding. And they're going to look at their resume like, it shows here that you stopped at age 11 or 12. Where did you go to school? I mean, did you move abroad and forgot your records, perhaps? Oh, not real. How do I put this? It's not registered by the government. Oh, oh, I see. Well, as much as I like your, as much as I like your charisma and everything, and your get to it go, I'm afraid we can't hire you. We'll call you if there's any positioning we can use you for. Uh, Buzz off. And then you're on the unemployment line and you're living in a flat, eating crisps and watching TV, and you wondered, where did my life go wrong? Like, I mean, I can do this magic, but it's not doing me jack dilly dilly. You know what? I guess you could kind of compare it to superpowers don't pay the bills either. So I guess this is why someone like
Exactly.
Clark Kent has to go out and hustle his own bread, because he does not have the luxury like Bruce Wayne to sit on his parents' trust fund.
Right. And to end the Hogwarts thing, I guess the ending is that, someone calls the person's parents and they're like, why did your kid stop getting educated at age 12? We need to investigate you. And then
Right,
I
they're
guess
gonna
the
be
parents
social
get
workers
arrested.
investigating this shit. Also, the whole thing of, look, I know that there's a lot of terrible child abuse cases that go through the cracks and stuff like that. But honestly, given the context of Harry Potter and the fact that they're in a crowded area, it's not like he's in the middle of the wild land moors of northern England or something. He is in a small Derbyshire, Shuri kind of place. Would not neighbors get suspicious of a kid being maltreated, malnourished, and basically running around in rags, living in a cupboard? Would that not elicit suspicion from the neighbors and get social services?
I know, like I said, there's so many things in these kind of stories that they just exist because the author wants them to exist, right? Like for example, I always thought that Rowling did that because she wanted it to be a reference to Oliver Twist.
I think she did. I mean, basically, is not Harry Potter just, Oliver Twist with magic?
That's
I
what I
mean,
thought it was. Yeah. And I guess it makes sense. But then, like I said, when you think about it more realistically, like if you don't think of it as a, fanciful story for children, then you see a lot of holes.
you do see a lot of holes. Once you've removed the magic and the wonder of it all, it becomes a very flimsy, shoddy story. I actually think maybe this is what killed Gerda and Kai. I wanted to make it into an epic fantasy. Maybe they would have worked better and would have worked pretty good had they just been kind of a simple fairy tale, and it would have been like a cute Disney movie that's 65 minutes long or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like not everything has to be so epic. And I think Harry Potter, if you just think of it as a child story, as children's literature from the 90s, it's fine. It doesn't have to be so detailed and, it's not meant to be like that. It's just good for, fun, right? And,
Exactly.
you just think about the aesthetic and the idea of a kid who was really badly treated by his adoptive parents. And then basically, he finds a lot of happiness in this group of people who are free thinkers. If you think about it that way, it's fine. But when you start thinking about it realistically, that's when it starts falling apart.
Right, and also all the details Rowling puts in postscript, like how do wizards go to the bathroom? I don't.
I think
Why?
she was
I need
trolling.
to know that.
She was
I know she was. I
joking.
know she was trolling, but yeah, thanks. I needed to know that.
Yeah, I remember that. It's so weird, but yeah.
Well, and also too, she made the morality so black and white. Like, oh, these muggles are so nasty, and then she has to put in one good muggle. Like, oh, they're not all bad. And
Okay,
then the whole
we
thing
need
with
a
the
separate podcast
goblins,
for discussing Harry Potter.
yeah, and also goblins and all that. Okay, enough
Yeah,
on
that
Harry
was
Potter.
problematic. It really was. I don't know how she got away with it because
The whole goblin thing.
honestly, that wasn't the only problem. There were a lot of other issues.
There were so many issues with Harry
She
Potter.
got away with it.
I do not know how this series. Also, too, the films, like, I guess the films were more tolerable, but I liked nobody in this cast. Everybody was unappealing, except, for like those random moments where I think later, like in like third or fourth movie, I don't remember. We get Victor Crumb, and I'm like, okay, good looking guy, and then that was it, and then that's all done. Like
Hmm.
5 minutes.
Yeah, Pattinson was in it too.
Yes, that's what he played. I think he played Victor Crumb, so he
No,
was the
no,
only good.
he's separate. Victor Crumb's another guy.
Oh shoot, was it? Oh,
Yeah,
see,
he's the exchange student or guest student from this place that's supposed to be like Bulgaria. That's Victor Crumb. He has
okay.
really short hair.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
Like almost like an
Yeah.
army cut. I
Oh
think
my.
yeah, and Pattinson was playing I forgot Cedric Diggory. He's another kid. And he got
Oh,
killed.
shoot. He got killed. Like, so glad to see he's come so far from Harry Potter and Twilight. Like, good on him.
Yeah.
Good on him. But yeah. Like I said, Harry Potter had so many problems in it. You see, and that's how bad it is. Like, I only saw like the movies, and I wasn't even paying attention to like who was what. Like, oh yeah, random person. Oh yeah, another school of magic. I wonder how
Yeah,
they're.
we're just is this the Gerda and Kai podcast or the slamming Harry Potter
Okay,
podcast?
let's get back to trash and Gerda and Kai.
We'll trash Harry Potter another
After
time.
another episode, all those
Yeah,
Potterheads are
like
going to
I
go
guess
after us.
we should just come out. We just should just come out and say it that we don't really like Harry Potter.
You don't like Harry Potter. I only like Cedric, just because of
Yeah,
Patty.
I only like some things about Harry Potter, like the architecture and some of the animals, like Bucky or Buckeye, like that hippogriff. I like that one.
I did like the hippogriff. I also liked, oh, like I was thinking about, Hedgewig,
Hedwig, and I
Hedwig.
like the phoenix, fox. I think.
Yes, that was cool too. I mean, honestly, props to cool animals. We need to. You know what? I didn't put any cool animals in Gerda and Kai. This is why it sucked
Yeah,
too.
you should
Oh, cool
have.
animals! I should have put some cool animals in it. Like, I don't know why I didn't put any fantasy animals in it.
I know. I wonder why you didn't. I mean, I think every fantasy has at least one animal companion.
Oh wait, I did have the dragon. Remember the dragon the
Oh
kids fought at
yeah.
the fair, and it grew too big, and Kai got mad because it was eating the house.
Oh yeah, but we barely heard about that. We didn't see it in OC training.
No, we didn't. I had a lot of ideas in my head, but I didn't put them down because I couldn't write the damn thing.
Yeah, it was too convoluted to write.
It was way too, and the style was really draining. Like, for me to write one page for Gerda and Kai, I could have banged out 20 pages for Andre.
And also you were lacking direction. I think that was why it was so hard to write because you felt like you had to make it really flawless and beautiful with all the right turns of phrases, but the characters were flat and you didn't know what to do with the plot, so it just became extremely convoluted.
It did. It did. It became very convoluted. I was substituting style over substance, essentially.
It was just purple prose.
It was purple prose. It was. And, I thought some of the descriptions were beautiful and some of it was, but honestly, do beautiful descriptions really flesh out a character? Like, I'd much rather hear Andre curse at something and drop a lot of F bombs, because it shows his true core of his heart, the blood in his veins,
Mhm.
than a long-winded, oh, his silver hair fell like mist upon his broad shoulders or something.
Right, and then he looks like a cadaver, but then he does something really sweet and romantic for Gerda.
Exactly. Like, like, oh, his sunken cheekbones and hollowed out eyes. But then, I don't know, next paragraph down, I don't know, he buys Gerda these really cute earrings or something, and then they accidentally hold hands.
Kai and Gerda were kind of like Boy Scouts.
They were Boy Scouts. Kai was so perfect. I mean, I even tried to make a flaw for him where he, killed Tamsibi's uncle. Because he saw that he was using necromancy, and her uncle was just this poor martyr. Like, oh no, I'm using necromancy to help people, and he's like, oh no, necromancy's bad, bad. I'm against so I'll chop off your head. And Tamsibi's like, oh, horrible, horrible. Uh, Reaper, I shall extract my revenge upon thee. And then she does this rather than just go after Kai. She figures, oh wait, he's got those little boys he likes. Okay, I'm going to try to get at the boys and then get at him. And then she doesn't expect that Gerda's going to be a badass and try to save everybody.
I think the problem here is that you were forcing the narrative again, because Kai is a reaper, right? Why would he suddenly be so interested in stopping someone from necromancy? It just felt like an overreach.
I guess because in his crazy world building, necromancers use people's souls and control and manipulate them, but it also offsets the balance of the world, and people's souls might get corrupted and then they like get eradicated forever or turn into ghosts.
Right, but you never established any of this world building, so it was hard to understand. Like, what
Yeah,
is a ghost, for example? And how does a ghost compare to someone in the afterlife?
that's true. I never established that. And there was so much elaborate world building. I thought, oh, I'm going to make a handbook like those D&D games.
And another thing is that how do you know that souls disappear forever? Like, how would you know that? Like, how can you ascertain that?
Because you don't see them anymore. That's how flimsy my reasoning was.
So in this universe, when you don't see anything anymore, you automatically assume they're gone.
Yeah, you assume they're gone. Because they'll just like evaporate. And they're like screaming, ah! And then they fade into a scream.
That's
And then,
what
oh,
Joel wants to do.
no. No, Joel. But that's how that was supposed to happen. And Kai's like, oh no, necromancy, a great evil that I must go against. No one in this land must practice necromancy, and whoever it is, I will not discriminate against, and I will personally execute them. And he ends up lopping off poor Tamsibi's uncle's head.
But what happens when he executes someone? Is it like a normal death, or does that person fade into nothingness?
It's like a normal execution. And I think and that's what how do I say, I guess that's what makes, well, I guess maybe he makes sure they don't come back as ghosts.
Like I said, it just becomes so convoluted. Like
It
one
does.
question leads to another.
It does. And then you need a whole handbook to understand the context of the story and everything.
And then you just lose track of the story. I mean, even for Kai's backstory, it was very confusing because he was a human once, and then he went through slavery. So he also has a little bit of that victim mentality.
He does. He did have that victim mentality. He went through too many things, first slavery, and then he was a slave warrior, and then he went on an island for free slaves, freed slaves trying to start all over again, and had a wife, and she
And
had a
then she
baby,
died.
got killed by these raiders, so he took revenge and killed all the raiders. And then I guess he became kind of a dark loner. He became a ranger like friggin' Aragorn, or I guess like I don't know, Geralt without magic. And then he met this guy who was the previous Frost Lord, who traveled with him a year, and then they're like, oh, I'll challenge you to a duel and take my spot. And he's like, no, I don't want to. And then he ends up killing him. He's like, oh no, I've become the Frost Lord now. But I must become a better Frost Lord than my predecessor.
But why? I mean, if he's such an indifferent person, he would just not care. It just felt so forced.
It did feel forced. I guess it's because Kai's like, no, oh wait, I have power now, and then I will use it for good. And even though my very presence brings death and destruction, I will do my best as a reaper to guide poor souls into the afterlife and defend them against the dark forces.
Mm-hmm. To cap, how would you say Gerda and Kai compared to your current characters, Tatuzia and Andre?
Oh boy, there's even no comparison. But I guess to all right, well, you know what? Let's start with Kai versus Andre. Um, Kai is flat, boring, idealistic. As the Frost Lord, he's a bit more interesting, I guess, more cool factor than say 19th century Kai, who's just this bitter jackass who's indifferent and selfish about a lot of things, but he ends up being a reaper anyway. So even though he's not in charge of winter, he's just reaping, and all that. Um, they're both kind of boring, flat figures of authority, and they're just sort of on a moral high stool, and they're just so perfect. Even 19th century Kai, even though he tried to come off as a jackass, he was still wonderful because, look at him. He's taking care of this village, and he's reaping souls, and he's caring for his daughter, and then he cares for Gerda and her sons, and all that. And um, but Kai is flat, boring. He really has no personality. He's not shown us any personality. He is extremely cold, aloof, too perfect, too kind, just such a nicey goody two shoe. Um, let's compare Andre. Andre is a full blooded person. He is a person of many flaws. He is opinionated, loudmouth, a braggart, a bit of a glutton, a hedonist, um, a bit crazy about the carnal passions of life. And he's very opinionated. He's very stubborn. He's very defiant. He's argumentative, belligerent. Um, but despite all these flaws and despite his anger and rage, he's actually a very good guy who cares for people. Sometimes he's indifferent. Well, not really indifferent. Sometimes he's very selfish. But once he starts to understand someone, he will he will give the last crumb of bread and the shirt off his back for them. Um, Andre is very go getter. Andre does not like to think about things too much. He just does it. He's very honest. And despite all this, he has a very strong sense of personal responsibility. Although we did keep emphasizing Kai had responsibility, it felt more like a role that he had as a figure in order to get benefits as a position. Like, well, I guess if I'm a
Hmm.
Reaper or a Frost Lord, I have to do all this. Meanwhile, for Andre, it's a source of conviction. Andre will take personal responsibility because he wants to. Like, for example, he wants to make sure Verochka goes to the city and has some sort of chance because it's in his bones, it's in his blood to make sure that you just keep fighting and that you don't give up, or why he wants to help people out when they're in a hard time. Or like for one example, he had to, it's kind of a spoiler, but he was disobeying army command to save the lives of these two individuals, and he did that out of conviction. It was going to cost him, it was going to, he's probably going to get into trouble, but he he does it out of conviction. So um Andres he's very driven, he's very full, and he's narrating his own story, he's telling it from his own perspective. And Andre's blunt. He doesn't care about pretty words or anything like that. But Andre does have appreciation for the higher things. He likes French, he likes mythology, he likes paintings, he likes opera and music and things. Um, but Kai, on the other hand, is just, oh, cool death wizard, badass person, wizard thing. Um, and then I guess we could compare. Well, in your opinion, what are some of the things like Tatuzia versus Gerda? What are some of the striking things you have seen between these two women?
I don't think they're anything alike. First of all, Tatsuya has a lot of flaws, but she also has a lot of pros. I mean, she's actually a very kind and thoughtful person, even though she is also hardened by her profession and her own experiences, and she's also very cynical. But she is someone who thinks a great deal, and she really does love Andre and she really wants to see him prosper. But at the same time, she's also a self sabotager, kind of like my character Joel. While Gerda, I don't even know how to describe her. Just the shy, sweet mom of two kids, and then she falls in love with the Frost Lord.
That's true. So exactly. So there is this. there is the flatness versus dimension. I mean, here we have Tatuzi, as you've succinctly described her. She is very cynical. She's very hardened. She can be very bitter and harsh and sometimes downright nasty. But underneath all that, she is very compassionate. She does have a lot of generosity to give, and she does love Andre, and she wants to see him prosper. But she does sabotage herself, and she has these complexes about herself that sort of stem from, her childhood, and her youth, but also a lot of her own pride, because I think she could let go of her hard pride and, be like, well, you know what, I don't care about all these
Hmm.
things that people care about. I'm just going to be happy. you know um and also, Tatuzia has her own form of opinion and her own passions and hobbies and her own flaws that come into play. um and we see that very clearly, but with Gerda, she's more or less a figure just kind of floating through this plot, and never does any wrong. Like, she's even showing compassion to her enemy, Tamsibi, even though she's gravely maimed, poor Lord Frost.
Exactly. And Gerda doesn't even seem to have any hobbies. I mean, you say that she loves magic, but you just tell us that.
Right,
It's
and
never
she plays the
shown.
flute and embroiders, but I don't show that. Like, maybe a flaw with that. Like, instead of doing magic, she just wanted to play the flute all day.
Yeah, like we don't know if she's lazy, like secretly lazy. I mean, she has to do stuff as a midwife, but when she has time on her hands, does she actually do anything to advance herself or does she just slack off?
Exactly, exactly. We don't know that. And with Tatuzia, we have an idea that, in her free time, she does try to read and improve her mind, but and she likes to do little hobbies and things, but it's not that Tatuzia is lazy, it's just that she wants to be distracted by aesthetics, and she just sort of wants to be lost in this world of beauty like Thais.
Right. And we don't know anything about Gerda's mental landscape.
No, no, we don't. All we know is that she's so kind and caring, and this saintly Madonna mother.
Exactly. And then she finds the perfect man in the Frost Lord.
Yes, even though we say he's flawed. Look at him, he's so ugly and cold. He's not that
That's not a
cold.
flaw. Do you think Joel helped you realize that and Andre as well? Because you went back to his
Andre,
story.
Joel and Andre helped me realize what flaws were in a man, and Kai Frostlord did not have any flaws. Perfect as perfect could be. And what was weird was that Gerda didn't really find him ugly. Like, she found him scary at first, but then she grew to love him and thought he was handsome, more handsome than anybody else.
It was just so like it just had to happen that way, right? So
Exactly.
coincidental.
And Frostlord finds her so beautiful, like, oh, the most beautiful woman in the world. You know,
It's
who can
pretty
compare?
cheesy.
Who can compare to Gerda?
And don't forget they're really like sanitized. All they do is hold hands and they're really happy. Like it's just very, PG-13, I guess. Whether that was intentional or not, I don't know. It's because it was originally meant to be kind of like a fairy tale, right?
Yeah, fairy tale for kids. I was gonna do like a Pippi Longstocking thing, and
Right.
make all
And then
these.
you try to make it epic fantasy like, Game of Thrones.
I tried to make Game of Thrones out of Pippi Longstocking. That's a bad combo, y'all.
Yeah, so it just felt, kind of uneven. Mixed two very different genres together. This high fantasy for adults, epic fantasy, and something for children.
Exactly, exactly. It felt so disjointed and wrong. And I guess I was trying to get some, saucy love scenes in there, but that was going to happen after they had their big, wonderful wedding.
I didn't even know they were. Oh, at the end they get married.
At the
Yeah.
end, they get married, and it's a glorious wedding where Lady Autumn unites with, the Lord of Winter, and it's a beautiful wedding, and it's just so lavish and elaborate, and everybody's happy, and it's just like the most beautiful fairy tale wedding you've ever had, and then they spend this quiet nice little night in a cottage drinking hot cider, and then they close the bedroom door, and then suddenly Careless Whisper starts playing.
Hey, I didn't think they were the type to do that. You said that they found more fulfillment in reading a book together.
Well, I guess maybe after they went through death, and she saw his true form as a reaper, and then he saw her glorious form as the ultimate phoenix, uh, alkanost hybrid. They're like, oh, life is too short, let us make love, my love.
Right. Yeah. So I think we really covered everything. Wow. Okay. So this podcast episode is kind of like our old lengths back in 2020, over 1 hour.
That's all right, because we covered all this crazy nonsense. It was a wild trip, man.
I think we now know why we want to move away from Gerda and Kai.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, it'll work really cute as a kid's story. Maybe someday, long, long into the future, like cosmic future, I may do them as a short, cute little story, like a little fairy tale that's 60 pages long, a mini novelette. Um, but and it's just going to be mostly artwork, maybe a little cute comic series or something, but um not an epic novel. Nope, nope. We're not going to do Game of Thrones. We're not doing Wheel of Time. We're not doing Sanderson rubbish. No more. No more. We're only going to focus on realism and the 20th century. We'll be dealing with, you know, crippling historical events and psychology and even some crazy ass comic stuff, y'all.
Yeah, exactly. So look forward to that, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. And thank you for stopping in to listen to us in this mad, mad journey.
We're going to have that Harry Potter podcast soon, too.
We're going to trash Potter. I'm sorry. Potterheads come after
I'm
us.
sorry, Harry Potter fans. I just had to come out about it because, I've actually disliked Harry Potter since I was a kid.
I liked some of it, but none of it really appealed to me. And I'm only thinking about the animals, and I'm only thinking about Cedric. Like, more screen time for Cedric.
Yes. All right. See you guys.
See you. Bye.
Bye.